Dan adjusted the straps on his worn backpack as he stepped into the crowded corridor of the Orion space station. The hum of machinery and the occasional clatter of metal echoed off the walls, mixing with the low murmur of aliens and humans alike. It was a strange place for a human like him, a technician in charge of minor repairs, a cog in the massive rotating wheel of a station filled with species he barely understood. Yet here he was, stuck with no private quarters and little choice but to share an apartment with someone completely alien. When he first moved in, the building administrator had introduced him to his new roommate with a brief, awkward gesture toward a closed door. "Valari, keep to yourself. Don't touch anything," the administrator had said. Dan had nodded politely, figuring that was normal alien etiquette. He didn't know it then, but Lyra, the Valari woman behind that door, was unlike anyone he had ever met. Lyra rarely spoke. She moved silently through the apartment, always careful to avoid direct contact. Her eyes were large and reflective, like dark liquid mirrors, and her hair seemed to shift subtly, almost like leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. She carried a small metal container filled with soil everywhere she went, treating it with a reverence that puzzled Dan. Despite their awkward roommate arrangement, he had started to notice strange patterns in her behavior. She ate luminous fruits that glowed faintly, nibbled at them slowly, and sometimes seemed to draw strength from them. She slept very little, curling into herself at odd times of the day. She locked the bathroom door whenever she bathed, and she warned him, once very sternly, never to enter the bathroom while she was inside. Dan had complied. After all, boundaries were boundaries, no matter how odd the reason. But that evening everything changed. The station's artificial gravity had a minor glitch, causing the water and air circulation systems to malfunction in their sector. Steam began spilling from the bathroom vent, curling into the hallway in thick clouds. Dan smelled the faint metallic tang of overheated machinery mixed with something else, something organic and sweet. Concern prickled his nerves. He hesitated at first, then heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Lyra coughing, weakly in distress. Instinct took over. "Lyra!" he called, rushing toward the door. "I'm coming in!" Before he could knock, the door slid open just enough to let the steam swirl out, and Dan, blinded by the cloud, stepped inside. What he saw stopped him cold. Lyra was kneeling in a shallow pool of water. Her form glowed softly in shades of green and gold, and her skin seemed almost translucent, covered with delicate vine-like patterns that pulsed faintly with light. Petal-shaped structures arched around her shoulders, like a living armor made of leaves. She gasped at the intrusion, her large eyes wide with shock and fear. The sight was unlike anything Dan had ever imagined. Not human, not like any alien he had ever encountered. It was beautiful, otherworldly, and incredibly fragile. For a moment, neither of them moved. Dan could feel the weight of the situation, the tension hanging thick in the warm, steamy room. Lyra's body trembled, not from cold, but from fear. Her species, he had learned, considered their bathing form sacred and vulnerable, a state they never showed to outsiders. I'm sorry," Dan said quickly, stepping back and raising his hands in surrender. "I thought you were in danger. You were coughing." Lyra flinched, trying to shrink behind her glowing vines. You should not have entered," she whispered. Her voice was soft, but sharp with warning. "Humans, they are not to see this. It is shameful. It is dangerous." Dan swallowed, unsure what dangerous meant in this context. "I wasn't trying to. I just heard you struggling. You could have been hurt." Her vines quivered, brushing the water around her. "You must not tell anyone," she said urgently. "If they find out, they will not understand. I will lose everything." Dan nodded, trying to reassure her. I won't tell anyone, I promise. I wanted to help. Slowly, carefully, he moved closer and extended his hand, not touching her directly, just offering support. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward him and then back to the shimmering pool. After a tense moment, she reached out, letting him help her find balance. He handed her the metal container of soil she had dropped, and her fingers brushed his lightly. That small contact sent a strange warmth through him, a mixture of relief and awe. You are different from what I expected, Lyra murmured, her voice still trembling. I thought humans were careless, cruel, unpredictable. You are neither. Dan smiled faintly, even though he was still stunned by her glowing form. Humans are a lot of things, he said. Some are careless, some are cruel, but we try to help. That's all I did. Lyra's gaze softened slightly. You stayed, even after seeing me like this. Most would have run, or worse. She didn't elaborate, but Dan understood the weight behind her words. As she began to relax, he noticed her glow dim slightly, her vines curling tighter around her. Are you okay? He asked gently. I need soil, she said, her voice faint. Without it, I will weaken. My people, they do not allow this outside our homeworld. I cannot ask for help, not from anyone. Dan frowned. So, this is why you carry the container everywhere? Lyra nodded. It sustains me. This form, it is my true body. Not hiding, not pretending. But it is fragile. Without the minerals and nutrients, I cannot survive long. Dan was silent for a moment, thinking. Then he said, If you need help, I can help. I don't care what your people say. I know a lot about the station's storage areas. I can find the minerals you need. Lyra's eyes widened. You would do this? Dan shrugged, trying to keep his tone casual. I'm your roommate. I figure that counts for something. A tense silence followed. Steam swirled around them, curling in the corners of the bathroom. Lyra finally lowered the glowing vines from her shoulders, letting the warmth of the water envelop her. You are very strange, human. Most would have run, or feared me. I'm not most humans, Dan said simply. I don't run from people who need help. Her gaze lingered on him, and for the first time, there was a spark of trust in her eyes. It was fragile, delicate, but real. Perhaps you were meant to see me, she whispered. Not by accident, but by fate. Dan blinked, unsure what to say. Fate? Maybe. Or maybe it was just bad luck with the station's plumbing. Either way, he felt a strange connection to her. Something beyond species, beyond appearances. Something that mattered more than anything he had encountered on this station. He helped her gather her things, careful not to touch her directly. She wrapped herself in a soft, leaf-like fabric she carried, her glow dimming as she regained some composure. I must recover, she said. Do not enter again. Not until I call you. I won't, Dan promised. I wanted you to be safe. That's all. For a few moments they stood there, the warm steam curling around them. Then Lyra finally gave a small nod and stepped back toward her private corner. You are not like I expected. Perhaps humans are capable of honor and kindness after all. Dan chuckled softly. I'll take that as a compliment. That night, as Dan lay in his bed, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. Lyra's form, her glowing vines, the petal-like structures around her shoulders. It was unlike anything he had ever imagined. Yet what stayed with him most was her trust. Fragile as it was, she had let him see her in a state of vulnerability, and she had allowed him to help without fear. He realized something important. Appearances could be deceiving, and bravery, kindness, and loyalty were not limited to any species. In fact, humans might even excel at them when it mattered most. Meanwhile, Lyra lay in her corner, curled around her soil container. She watched him silently through her reflective eyes. Perhaps humans were not as predictable as she thought. Perhaps there was more to this species than she had ever believed. And perhaps she had made the right choice in allowing him to stay. Outside, the station continued its endless rotation. Stars shimmered through the reinforced windows, vast and cold. But inside that small apartment, a human and a Velari shared a quiet, fragile connection, an understanding that would shape their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The night deepened, and for the first time since leaving her home world, Lyra felt something she had never felt before. A sense of safety, a small spark of trust, and the faint, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, humans could be allies in a galaxy that often misunderstood her kind. And Dan, still processing the evening's events, knew one thing for certain: life on this station would never be the same again. Something important had begun, something strange, unexpected, and entirely human. As the stars glimmered far above, both of them drifted toward sleep. Lyra's glow dimmed, but it did not disappear entirely. A subtle reminder that she was alive, vibrant, and perhaps slowly learning to trust the human who had seen her, not with fear, but with care. The apartment was quiet now, but the memory of that evening, the accidental sight, the fragile trust, the unspoken bond, lingered. It was a start, a beginning. And the story of Dan and Lyra, two beings from very different worlds, was only just beginning. The next morning, Dan woke to the quiet hum of the station. Sunlight, or what passed for sunlight on Orion's station, filtered through the reinforced windows, casting long shadows across the narrow apartment. Lyra was already awake, sitting cross-legged near her small soil container. Her glow was faint now, just enough to trace the delicate vine-like patterns across her skin. She looked calm, almost serene, yet Dan noticed her eyes flicking nervously toward the apartment door, as if bracing for some danger he could not see. "Morning," he said softly, careful not to startle her. He poured himself a cup of synthetic coffee and took a tentative sip. "You rested well?" Lyra tilted her head, her reflective eyes studying him. "I slept," she said slowly. "But I am not strong yet. Without proper minerals, I will weaken. Soon I will need more than this small amount of soil." Dan frowned. "Then we'll get more. I know where the station keeps the agricultural reserves. Restricted access, but I can get you what you need." She shook her head. "I cannot enter those areas alone. My people, they forbid exposure to outsiders. And humans, you cannot risk it. You might get caught." Dan smiled faintly, a spark of determination in his eyes. "Then we'll risk it together. I'm not leaving you to weaken, Lyra. Not after yesterday." Lyra's glow brightened slightly. There was an unspoken acknowledgement in that simple statement, a recognition that this human was different. He was stubborn, brave, and willing to put himself in danger for her. She had never expected that from a human. By mid-morning, Dan had mapped out a plan. The restricted agricultural lab was located in the lower decks of the station, heavily monitored by security drones and automated locks. Most humans would never dare enter without authorization. But Dan had a few advantages. He knew the maintenance schedules, the blind spots in the drone patrols, and he was clever with improvised tools. Lyra prepared herself as best she could. She wrapped the leaf-like fabric around her shoulders, secured her soil container, and allowed her body to emit a faint glow, a signal that she was ready to absorb nutrients once they reached the minerals. The air seemed to vibrate softly around her, a subtle reminder of her unique physiology. They moved carefully through the station, slipping past corridors and bypassing security checkpoints with Dan's improvised gadgets. Lyra's glow provided a faint light, pulsing gently in the dim hallways. Dan could feel her tension, her fear, yet also a growing trust. As they approached the lab, a security drone rounded the corner. Its sensors glowed red, scanning the hallway. Dan froze, signaling to Lyra to stay behind a bulkhead. He quickly grabbed a maintenance panel and created a distraction, a burst of sparks that drew the drone's attention. As the drone investigated, Dan and Lyra slipped past it and reached the lab door. Inside, rows of metallic containers held mineral-rich soil. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, a comforting scent to Lyra. She knelt beside one container, her vines quivering as she gently pressed her glowing form against the soil. Her body began to absorb the nutrients, the glow spreading brighter across her patterns. Dan watched silently, amazed by the transformation. The bath-like form she had revealed to him yesterday was now even more powerful, radiant with life as she absorbed the minerals. He realized that what he had once thought fragile was actually resilient, a form built for survival in a way humans could hardly understand. "You can stay near me," Lyra said softly, sensing his awe. You can see this, but understand it is rare to allow anyone close. You are trusted." Dan nodded, keeping his distance yet staying close enough to help if needed. "I understand. I won't interfere." Minutes passed and Lyra's glow intensified. Her vines stretched subtly, brushing the soil and drawing nutrients into her body. The petals around her shoulders lifted slightly, like wings unfurling. Dan realized she was regaining strength quickly. He could almost feel the energy radiating from her, a gentle warmth that filled the room. Suddenly, an alarm blared. The lab door locked automatically, and another security drone appeared in the doorway. Dan's heart raced. "We need to move, now!" he shouted. Lyra's glow dimmed slightly as she finished absorbing the minerals. She extended her vines, creating a subtle barrier between them and the drone. Dan grabbed the remaining soil container, and together they ran toward the exit. The drone fired a stun beam, but Lyra's quick reflexes and her plant-like extensions deflected it just enough to give them time to reach the maintenance hatch. They crawled through narrow ventilation shafts, twisting and turning until they reached a hidden exit in the lower decks. Dan wiped sweat from his forehead, glancing at Lyra. She was breathing lightly, her glow steady now, a sign of full recovery. "You did well," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "Most humans would have panicked." You are clever and brave." Dan shrugged, though a small smile tugged at his lips. "I just didn't want to see you weaken. And besides, I'm pretty good with improvisation." She tilted her head, studying him. "You risked a lot for me. Not many would. Most, they fear what they do not understand. You faced it." Dan felt a warmth in his chest, a mixture of pride and something else he could not name. "I guess that makes me different," he said simply. Lyra's glow pulsed gently, a soft, rhythmic light. "Perhaps humans are not as predictable as I thought. I am learning." They returned to their apartment, the stolen minerals safely in Lyra's container. She absorbed them quietly, her glow now soft and steady, the patterns on her body vibrant once more. Dan watched, fascinated by the grace and strength of her form. He realized that humans were not the only species capable of resilience. Lyra embodied survival in a way he could only admire. That evening, the two of them sat quietly in the small apartment. Lyra had returned the glow to a faint shimmer, no longer bright but still visible, a reminder of her vitality. Dan prepared a simple meal, synthetic protein packs for himself, and a few edible minerals mixed for her species. You helped me, she said quietly. Not because of duty, not because of expectation, but because you chose to. That is rare. That is human. Dan looked at her and smiled. I help because it's the right thing to do. That's what being human is sometimes. We look out for each other, even when it's hard or dangerous. She studied him, her reflective eyes softening. You understand more than I expected. Perhaps humans can be allies, not just in survival, but in trust. Dan nodded, feeling a deep sense of connection. Trust is earned, Lyra, and you've earned mine by letting me help. For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to relax completely in his presence. She curled around her soil container, petals rising slightly in a gentle, protective gesture. Dan understood that she had never shared this part of herself willingly with anyone outside her species. Her trust was fragile, precious, and entirely hers to give. Days passed. They established a routine, Dan helping Lyra maintain her strength, learning more about her species, and slowly discovering the secrets of Valari biology and culture. He marveled at her resilience, her intelligence, and her ability to survive in ways he could never fully comprehend. Lyra, in turn, began to respect the human spirit, his courage, his cleverness, and his unwavering commitment to do what was right. One evening, as the station rotated and stars flickered through the reinforced windows, Lyra turned to Dan. You saw my true form, and you stayed. That means more than you know. Dan smiled, shrugging. I told you. Roommates look out for each other. That's all. She let out a soft, almost melodic sigh. Perhaps that is enough. For now. But I think there will be more challenges. We must be ready. Together. Dan felt a thrill of anticipation. He had already risked so much, learned so much, and yet he knew their journey had only just begun. Then we'll face them together, he said firmly. No matter what. Lyra's petals shifted, brushing gently against the floor. Her glow pulsed softly, a sign of deep trust and acceptance. Yes, she said, together. And for the first time in her life away from her homeworld, Lyra felt completely safe with a human. She had expected fear, rejection, or betrayal. Instead, she found courage, loyalty, and an unexpected bond that bridged two species. Dan, too, realized that trust and bravery were not limited to humans. Lyra's resilience, her grace, and her willingness to allow him into her most vulnerable moments had taught him that heroism came in many forms, some glowing, some fragile, and all worth respecting. As the station continued its endless rotation, the stars shining beyond reinforced windows, both Dan and Lyra understood that they had found something rare: friendship, trust, and a partnership that transcended worlds, species, and expectations. And in that quiet, small apartment, amidst glowing vines and the hum of machinery, a human and a Valari woman prepared to face whatever the galaxy had in store for them, together, unafraid, and stronger for the bond they had forged. The adventure was far from over, but one thing was certain: they would face it side by side, each learning from the other, each trusting in the strength that came not from their species, but from the heart. And so, in the small glow of that apartment, a fragile yet unbreakable trust blossomed, a human and an alien bound by courage, understanding, and the quiet promise that no matter what the stars might bring, they would not face it alone.